Football, or soccer, was first codified in the United Kingdom in the 1870s and quickly exploded all over the world to the point that only one UN-recognized nation does not have a national team. I'll save you the Google. It's the Marshall Islands. We already did a video about how they're trying to get a national team anyways, but that's not the point. The expansion of the game was obviously particularly aggressive in Britain's colonial empire, where there was just an extreme amount of exposure to British culture, and you obviously start playing the same sports. You can see nations that have Britain to thank for their Independence Day all over the World Cup. You've got Nigeria, you have Australia, you have freaking the United States and Canada. Ghana. How did the so-called crown jewel of the British Empire miss out on this football mania that stretches from Iceland to Togo, from Trinidad and Tobago to North Korea? See, all of those teams have made the World Cup, but India and its 1.4 billion sports-obsessed people have not. The only country in the same neighborhood population-wise is China. And while they might not be good, they have made a World Cup and they've made headlines lavishly spending to try and improve their team and their league, which India hasn't. India didn't even try to qualify for some of the World Cups in the 70s and the 80s and didn't have a national, fully professional league until 2006. Even then, it was slow to get off the ground, plagued by terrible marketing, poor professionalism, and poor attendance. But all this malaise over the game was not, actually, always the case. There was a time where the Blue Tigers of India were front and center on the international stage. India was actually a very early adopter of the sport. By the 1890s, British regimental teams were playing against local Indian clubs and a whole plethora of different regional cups and competitions. The level of competition in these cups was actually so good and intense that one of the players received a trial at Arsenal after India's team toured Europe for the first time. It was the goalkeeper, Jyotish Chandra Guha, who was India's first European-based player. The first match after independence was in 1948 at the Olympics, which of course were held in Britain. But India sent a swashbuckling, famously barefoot side and only lost 2-1 to France in the opening round. That was actually the start of what is India's golden generation. Now, you might be thinking I'm referencing the 1950 World Cup qualification, but I'm not. They actually qualified for that by default. India then did not attend the World Cup, and this was widely speculated as urban legend because FIFA made it a rule that you had to wear shoes in order to play, and India was still at this time playing mostly barefoot. But the captain at the time, Sailin Mana, insisted this wasn't the case, and it is now widely accepted they really just didn't want to pay the travel costs associated with getting from India to Brazil, and they considered the Olympics more important. The team responded to the potential frustration by winning the inaugural Asian Games, beating Iran in the final while not wearing shoes. Iran was wearing shoes, thus crowning India as the first Asian powerhouse in the world's game. After an embarrassment at the 1952 Olympics where it lost to Yugoslavia 10-1, India was able to adapt to the fact that it had to wear shoes at the 1956 Olympics by doing the absolutely unthinkable. It made the semifinals. India then lost to Yugoslavia a much more respectable 4-1 and lost the bronze medal match to Bulgaria, but a semi-final run at the Olympics is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. They then rounded out this golden era with a second Asian Games title in 1962. But a year later, the talismanic coach, Saeed Abdul Rahim, who had led the national team to all of this success, passed away, and India never qualified for another Olympic Games again. And remember, the Olympics were a senior tournament, like full senior national teams until 1992, and after Saeed Abdul Rahim's death, the team also never made it to the final of the Asian Games again, which was also a full senior tournament until 2002. And this decline into the 60s, 70s, and 80s highlighted India's inability to adapt to the changing game. You could see that with them refusing to wear shoes until they were absolutely mandated, then taking a little while to get used to them before they were able to win a little bit more, and then everybody was gone. It's also evident that in spite of the fact that India has some of the oldest club competitions in the world, the Durand Cup started in 1888. It is still contested every year. That's the oldest competition in all of Asia, in the 5th oldest competition in the world. But in spite of that, India didn't create a fully national league of any kind until 1996. That was the year I was born. That isn't just falling behind the times, that's falling behind the centuries. I mean, a professional league wasn't introduced until 2007 when the National Football League, yes, the NFL, That was the acronym. When the NFL gave way for the I-League, or reconstituted into the I-League, would be the right way to say that. Now, as absurd as all that sounds, it's important to understand why it took so long for a national program to take hold. As I did at the beginning of this video, everyone points at the size of India as a huge advantage. But in order to have that many people, the country geographically is huge and diverse and is culturally diverse. And much as the same as in the United States, that giant size makes it very difficult to set up some sort of national league. And it makes it particularly difficult to set up the ever-important grassroots systems that can funnel talent to the top. India had a head start on the eventual powerhouses, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Iran, but it wasn't able to capitalize on them because it couldn't create that infrastructure to develop talent. Then something else incredibly important happened too. In 1983, right as TVs were spreading all over India, the Indian national cricket team won the Cricket World Cup. This took cricket to the top of the sporting charts, to the top of all national interest, and left waning football interest out to dry. But crucially, that's not true everywhere. Hey you, subscribe to the channel today. More hot content like this. India is like 20 countries in one country. That's what Manolo Marquez, a coach who won the Indian Super League with Hyderabad last year, actually, told The Athletic. He continued, in some states, it's the number one. In another state, it doesn't exist. And in another state, it is just beginning. For example, the state of Goa in India, its official sport is football or soccer. But that's just one state, and it's a pretty small one at that. And while I dumped on the professionalization process in India as being troubled, it has brought a level of respectability back to the Indian national team. India has qualified for 3 of the 4 most recent Asian Cups, including the one in 2023 later this summer. Before that, it had qualified for 2, ever. And the competition started in 1956, and they qualified automatically in 1964 because everybody else opted out. But at the most recent Asian Cup, for the first time since 1964, India won a game. It shocked Thailand 4-1. Sunil Chhetri scored a freaking brace in that game, the superstar forward for India, who, by the way, is actually 3rd in the all-time scoring charts of active players in international play, behind Messi and Ronaldo. It's a pretty good list. But you might not have heard of him, because he's barely played outside of India, and definitely barely played in Europe. With an established national league and a national team that's clearly returning to some relevance, Chetri's inability to get into Europe to play in European leagues highlights a massive issue holding India back as it tries to continue to grow the game, and that's its citizenship laws, which is probably not where you expected me to go here. Now, it is against the Constitution of India to hold Indian citizenship and citizenship literally anywhere else. This isn't incredibly unusual. China does it the same way, but it is not helping the national team at all. That's because you have to be an Indian citizen in order to play for the Indian national team. That is the rule that the Federation has laid down. And if you are locked to India, that really doesn't give you the opportunities you might be able to get otherwise. Sunil Chhetri signed with QPR in the championship in 2009, but he failed to get a work permit because India's outside the top 70 in the world rankings. He was playing all the time, but it wasn't high enough. The issue is also highlighted with another story from this Athletic article. Jan Danda, a burgeoning star on Ross County in the Scottish Premiership, had his highlight tape retweeted by Rio Ferdinand, and he was wondering when Danda was going to get an Indian call-up. Now, Jan Danda's what's called an overseas citizen of India, which means he can have permanent residence in India, but because of the law, he can't have Indian citizenship and British citizenship at the same time. There is a way to get around this, though. You can just make overseas citizens of India eligible to play for the national team, but the Federation just hasn't done that. And for players like Danda, it'd be a great opportunity. He would walk into the Indian national team, he could play in Asian Cups, and they have a better shot at the World Cup because with the expanded format, Asia gets 8 teams in. But for Danda, there's little professional incentive to giving up his British passport for an Indian one because it would harm his livelihood. Giving up my British passport means I can't play professionally in the UK and some European clubs due to India's FIFA ranking. He did say permitting OCI cards, the Overseas Citizen of India cards, similar to other countries, will allow me to represent the Indian football team as a dual national. I hope this can happen soon. It's worth mentioning that the whole idea that your whole national team has to just be citizens of your country and can't have any international flavor at all has been concluded conclusively disproven by Morocco. Morocco just made the World Cup semifinal with a team that had the majority of its players born outside of Morocco. But you want to go watch all the celebrations and parades in Morocco and tell me that that team didn't have a tremendous effect on the joy and the passion for the game of every single person in that country. I mean, they put Morocco on the center of the world stage, and they've changed perceptions of the Moroccan national team forever. And some of them weren't born in Morocco, and that's freaking fine. Because they got on that field and they sang the anthem and they pulled on the shirt with the flag on it, and they represented those people in the streets that were celebrating their success. But even without that diaspora to help bring passion to the game, the passion is growing a lot in India anyways. According to FIFA, Indian fans made up the second largest contingent in Qatar outside of freaking Saudi Arabia, who was right next door. Scenes of celebration all over India after Messi took home his first defining World Cup made their rounds all over social media. And it had some wondering what that passion could look like if it was funneled into a more domestic sphere. Maybe in the future, if India qualifies, an Indian player might get such treatment instead. So then all that's left is for the AIFF, the All India Football Federation, to come up with a good plan for grassroots infrastructure development that is the only thing missing for India right now. They're drawing solid crowds, they have good TV interest, and they have a successful, sustainable professional league at the top. The TV interest is nowhere near the Premier League's level, but we'll get to that in a second. And there's also a small problem. The AIFF is actually so poorly run that it recently got India suspended by FIFA for a couple of days. The specifics of which would require their own video, but definitely are not a sign of an entirely healthy federation environment. But as the AIFF tries to get it turned around to get that grassroots development going, there is one very important key they need to focus on, at least according to one of their former national team coaches. Stephen Constantine said it's not about the population, it's about coach education. If you don't have decent coaches, you won't have decent players. Just look at Iceland, honestly. He even references Iceland. So there are people involved around the Indian Federation and the national team that have the right concept of how to develop this grassroots game. And with the peaking interest from the populace and the return to prominence of the national team somewhat, the opportunity is there for India to just turn the corner. As you'd hope, the leadership is aware that they don't want to try and emulate China's push, where you spend a ton of money and you don't let the grassroots develop first and then grow organically, but they are going to have time to figure this out because the interest is just rising. According to the English Premier League, viewership in India in the 2022-2023 season is up 95% from that same 2-week period to start the season the year before. It doubled. And if it keeps doubling, the world might have another sleeping giant on its hands. But it's gonna take time. Now, there were some great articles sourced for this video, 2 by The Athletic, 1 by Al Jazeera, that go incredibly deep on the topic of Indian footballing soccer culture. And they're all down in the description with all of our sources. Definitely recommend checking them out. And I recommend, if you are in England or Wales or Scotland or somewhere near there, coming in to hang out with me. I'm gonna be at Taunton Town. That's the club that I manage on Football Manager on April 25th, which is like a couple days after this video comes out. So if you want to join me for that game, it's going to be a blast. I'll be walking around rooting on Taunton Town, and I hope you're there. And of course, you can keep binge watching as well. This is a video about that one team, the Marshall Islands, that doesn't have a national team and how they're trying to change that and trying not to be underwater. It's complicated.